evening, everyone. Welcome. What a wonderful turnout on this very typical winter Vermont evening. My name is Mary Ide from the Friends of the Library, and I'm going to make a few announcements and then introduce our speaker for the evening. If you haven't had a chance to go up to the second floor to the Children's Illustrators case, there's a wonderful exhibit, Illuminating Illustration, picture book art inspired by illuminated manuscripts. And this is a display that's come from the Eric Carle Museum, so that's up on the second floor. We have a new Vermont Humanities Council 4-part reading and discussion series on the Latino Americans. It's titled Mexican Americans, Experience and Identity. The books in the series will deal with the experience of Mexicans living in the United States, from the struggles of migrant farm workers in California to day laborers, and the coming of age stories of Chicanos as U.S. citizens. So the first book discussion will be on Wednesday, January 20th at 7 p.m. The title of the book to be discussed is Bless Me Ultima by Rudolfo Anaya, and it chronicles the story of an alienated boy from New Mexico who seeks an answer to his questions about his relationship with Ultima, a magical healer. So books are available up at the circulation desk, and this series is being facilitated by Dr. Patricia Perdoza Gonzalez, who teaches at Keene State. So that's our new reading and discussion series for January. Our first Wednesday program tonight is Vincent Van Gogh, what influenced him and his influence on art. As is true of all of our first Wednesday series, they are brought to you by local sponsors, including the Brattleboro Camera Club, the Brattleboro Savings and Loan, the Retreat, Downs, Racklin and Martin, New Chapter, and Wyndham World Affairs, and the Friends are also a major sponsor. So we're very fortunate tonight to have as our speaker Carol Berry, who is an artist and a retired art educator. Intrigued by the work of Vincent Van Gogh, Carol has spent many years studying his paintings, reading his letters, and absorbing information that would lead her to a better understanding of the artist and his remarkable career. A few years ago, Carol traveled to the villages in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, where the artist lived and worked. She has been lecturing on various aspects of Vincent van Gogh's life to offer a deeper appreciation of his intense desire to touch some people through his art. And Carol has written a book about Van Gogh and his work, and if you are interested, please come up and see her afterwards, and here is an order form, and you could order her book. So let's welcome Carol to Brattleboro.
Good evening. Oh, I know what I have to do. All right. Now, let's just test and see if you can hear me everywhere. All the way up there. Good. Well, good evening. It's really a pleasure to be in Brattleboro and to talk to you about an artist that I have come to really love and who has been a part of my life for quite a number of years. And judging by you here, I think he has touched you in some ways too, or at least intrigued your interest. He is an artist who was unknown in his lifetime and unappreciated and ununderstood. And not 10 years after his death, he was catapulted onto the art scene, and his appreciation and the intrigue of his life and his art never ceased growing. So in this lecture today, I will primarily focus on Vincent and how he struggled to become the artist he became, how he developed an art language with a mission to touch some people, that's a quote from his letter, and how his art opened the doors for future artists to begin experimenting with art as an expressive language. I will give you Vincent's biography. I will touch upon the art of the past and of his present time, because he was not in a vacuum. He was very much influenced by art, by the people of his time, by authors. He lived in a very rich environment that had a huge impact on him. Every artist does. Every artist draws from what went on before and what circumstances surround him or her. In Vincent and his contemporaries, you will also see a huge shift in the direction of art. At that time when he was alive, the French Academy was a huge dictator of the art world. And artists began to rebel, and you will see that as I show you the slides. And they shifted from an art of the visible to gradually becoming an art of the invisible, as we will see in the 20th century. When we look at art, I would like you to just think about this. What do you respond to in a piece of art? Do you look at the subject matter? Does that carry a great importance for you? Or do you look at the colors, the way the shapes configure? What is it that you look at? Do you understand art always? Is it important to understand what you're looking at? And not to forget, too, that we look at art consciously, but on a subconscious level, we react to art, too. We react to the colors, to the shapes, to the lines. The art elements have their own language, and that is what we will see Vincent discovering and wanting to use in his art. So in order to understand Vincent, we have to go to the very beginning of his life. He was born in a little town in the south of Holland. And he was a sensitive child, a solitary child, and was deeply, deeply rooted in the environment of nature. His sister once said that nature spoke to Vincent with 1,000 voices, and his soul listened. And he will often in his letters speak about more soul in his art. His soul was definitely awakened by his love of nature, but also he grew up in a very religious household. His father was a Calvinist pastor, and that is the church he was in at the time. Vincent learned empathy. He learned to see the poor with eyes of a pastor. His father took him on many trips to visit the poor. He also had a very disciplined upbringing. His family emphasized the duty of education, of charitable deeds, of doing the best you could everywhere. They emphasized decency and responsibility and self-education. So he had a very good, solid foundation. It was a religious foundation, though, that really had a huge impact and that remained with him all of his life. He was a very religious, later a very spiritual man. Calvin, and he was Calvinist, brought up in Calvinist tradition, said that God created every leaf, every bush, every tree, so that men and women could rejoice in creation. And he did that. He rejoiced, even as a child. The other very important influence on Vincent was the tradition of the pictorial, verbal education of children. We still see that in some of our early childhood books. Pictures. Pictures are speaking more than 1,000 words. So almost all of his childhood, he was surrounded by pictures, by picture books, also by literature. Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the family's favorite books. He learned about symbolism of plants and flowers from his mother. But the three images that I show you at the bottom of this page had one of the most lasting impacts on him and influenced him throughout his life. He saw in his father's study an image of the prodigal son on your left, an image of reconciliation, of acceptance, something he actually tried to achieve with his father for his whole life and never did. But it was an emotional response to this image that made him seek that. He also realized that biblical stories, parables, could be expressed through art. Art, visual and storied narratives were a huge part of his early life. The middle image is an etching by Rembrandt of a cradle, a child in a cradle with this heavenly light shining upon it. Rembrandt was an artist too that would make a huge impact on him, because Rembrandt was an artist who depicted biblical stories in paint. He said once that Rembrandt could speak with a mysterious language for which there were no words. So Rembrandt was a very important influence on him. Also, the image of a cradle will resurface many years later when he's an artist, and I will tell you about that. The last one on the right is a wheat field, a funerary procession through the wheat field. Wheat fields function greatly in Vincent's art. This was again an image that was not just a wheat field and a funerary procession. It was more about the cycle of life, death, life, growth, nature, the creator making things happen, human beings completely entangled in what was going on in nature. There is a funeral procession, at the same time there is a reaper harvesting the wheat. So all of this was a seedbed for his work later on. He forever would be associating things, one thing with another, a story with a picture with a story. When he was 15 years old and finished formal education, Vincent was plucked out of the natural surrounding of his wonderful rural Holland and sent to the cities in Europe, Amsterdam, Den Haag, London, to become an art dealer apprentice. He had no choice in the matter. This was a family decision. But here again, Vincent, with this incredible desire to explore, to see, he took all that he saw into his whole being. He explored the art of the cities he was in. He educated himself about the artists he was supposed to sell, about their work, and he was fed constantly. And that is another thing with Vincent. Whatever he took into himself, he never lost. Everything is there, and he builds upon that later on in his paintings. He also began to read. Again, reading was emphasized. He read Dickens, he read George Eliot, he read Victor Hugo, he read Émile Zola, he read Harriet Beecher Stowe, feeding himself with stories, living within the stories. And while he was in Den Haag, one of the most pivotal happenings occurred, which I always have to mention, and it makes me really emotional at times to think of it. Vincent was 19. His 4-year younger brother, Theo, came to visit him while he was in the city of Den Haag, learning to be an art dealer. The two boys walked together in the Rijswijk, an area around Den Haag, were caught in a storm, had refuge in a mill, were given some fresh milk to drink, and those two boys, for the first time alone, pledged at that point to remain loyal to one another, to always be honest with one another, to support one another, and to write to each other, because they would barely live together in the future. They would always be apart. This was a most important time, because between the time of this meeting and Vincent's death, they exchanged, or Vincent wrote 652 letters to Theo. Long pages. Pages and pages of letters. And it was also the beginning of an art partnership that is unique in the world. Vincent always said that it was Theo, and he never forgot that, who really was a part of this creating of art. In one of his last letters, he said to Theo, "At present, I do not think my pictures worthy of the help you have given me," because Theo would support Vincent for the rest of his life. "But once they are worthy, I swear that you will have created them as much as I, and that we are making them together." So whenever you see a Vincent painting, do not forget Theo. Now, I'm going to take you on a little bit of an art history lecture, just because this is the art that was prevalent at the time of Vincent's life. Neoclassicism was still very much in vogue. Romanticism was beginning to stir up the art world from the orderly, symmetrical art of the realistic work of the classical Renaissance type artists. Romanticism came and began to explore more of the emotional upheaval of the time. So you'll see more movement in that artwork. Artists were beginning to react more to what was going on in their contemporary world, not focusing as much on the historical events of the past. And at the same time, there were artists who still adhered to the academic rules, the academic artists. They were the ones who still painted the historical scenes, the mythical scenes, and things that were accepted by the salon. These artists were painting for patrons. They were not painting of their own desire to paint as much. Whereas the Romantics were beginning to loosen things up. But Vincent, who is still learning to be an art dealer, got his eyes open and is learning about all these different art forms, these different artists' lives, and he is beginning to be drawn much more, not to the art of the gallery, where he is supposed to be selling the art, but to the art of his contemporaries, to the art of the landscape artists. Landscapes he understood, landscapes he loved, nature he loved. He also began to focus on the realist artists who were starting to not paint the wealthy, the portraits that were hanging in the galleries, but were starting to respond to their own time, to the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, when new slums and poor people began to appear in the cities. So these are artists below. You have a Courbet, a Daumier, a Millet, who are starting to paint what was going on in real life, uplifting the poor. They had a social cause. They wanted to change the life of the poor. So Vincent is beginning, because of his empathy, because of his familiarity with the poor of his rural Holland, he begins to identify much more with this type of art. And he begins to have a harder time selling the art he's supposed to sell. And so he is disillusioned. He is actually also lonely. All of his life he suffered from homesickness, very often also very depressed and melancholy. So in this time of disillusionment, when he's realizing he is in an apprenticeship that really doesn't mean much to him, where he is not able to really find meaning and relevance in the art that he's supposed to sell. He also has social issues. All kinds of loneliness and disappointment in relationships are piling up on him. And as he is alone in London, he spirals down. Many times he will do this, into a place of loneliness and abandonment. And what is picking him up in this time, and this is a very important part of his background, is he gravitates to religious books, to the Bible. He reads it backwards and forwards more than once, in French, in German, in English. He reads books by philosophers, by historians, and they all, like the art before he's seeing, like anything he has read, they also have a huge, deep impact on him. One of the great impacts he has is from this writer, Ernest Renan, who wrote La vie de Jésus, the life of Jesus. Vincent is finding through these books that he can identify with the suffering of Jesus, whom he knows a lot about through all the parables and his upbringing, and he realizes that understanding the suffering of Jesus makes his own suffering understandable and worthwhile. But one of the things that has changed his way of thinking, it had a big impact on him, was the quote by Renan, who said, "To act well in this world, one must sacrifice all personal desires. Man is not on this earth merely to be happy or even to be simply honest. He's here to realize great things for humanity." So these kinds of things that he's reading sink deeply into his being, and he doesn't forget, and they motivate him. But all of this struggling and searching and reading and disillusionment end up getting him fired. He fails his art dealership, which you can imagine. And he now kind of has a few years of searching. He is not yet where he wants to be. He does different jobs. He becomes a curate, a sales clerk. He also decides to maybe he should become a pastor like his father. He will get approval by his father. That's what he also hopes for. But he fails at all these things. He fails being a theological student because he refuses to study Greek and Hebrew, because he feels that's not necessary to minister to the poor. You don't need that language. So he fails again and decides then he would go into missionary training. And becoming a missionary was his biggest goal. He, however, fails his initial period as a missionary because of insubordination. He already felt he knew more than everybody there because he had read already so much. But he's not stopped. He encounters some coal miners while he's at the missionary school. And these miners are definitely people who walk in darkness, to whom the light of the gospel needs to be brought. So he has this fervent desire to bring love and light and truth to people who really need it the most. And where is that but in the most desolate mining district in Belgium? And here he becomes a miner. I have two paintings here by an artist who 5 years after Vincent was there painted the conditions of the miners. So you have a little bit of a visual there. The Missionary Society gave him actually a 6-month probation. They saw that he had this zeal, that he was anxious to do the preaching. But while Vincent was there, he realized preaching wouldn't alleviate people's suffering. He became like one of them. He gave up all the comfort. He started to live amongst the miners, to help them. He tore up his bedding. He tore up his last shirts to bandage the wounds of the wounded. He did what he felt Jesus would do if he lived amongst the miners. So he's living his faith to the fullest, which of course, when the Missionary Society comes to check on him, did not find approval because Vincent looked worse off than the miners he was ministering. Emaciated and ill and lonely, he lost his stipend, and he is now in utter loneliness, desolation once again in the Borinage, where his family thinks he's being idle, which was considered a sin, and where he had no prospect of anything happening in his life. He had given up everything, and the church now had given up on him because the the society decided he had no oratory skills. He was useless to them. So, however, this is the moment where Vincent began to realize that his vocation was the art that he already had been drawn to, the art that he had already started doing in his letter sketches to Theo. There was always this urge to do a drawing. He felt, though, at the time that he did that it would keep him from his real work, which was to minister. So he suppressed that urge to draw. But in this lowly place, where nothing was there anymore to hold him up, he lost the Van Gogh status. He became Vincent. This is where he started to pick himself up. He began to draw. And the drawing here is starting to revive him. And because he had the examples of the artists before him, Rembrandt and Millet, he had teachers all along that showed him how to do an art that spoke, that could touch people, that could elevate the normal to something extraordinary. So while he is in the Borinage, he is beginning to sketch. He's alone, he has a room with some miners, and he is fervently drawing. And he said that he felt, despite everything, his spirits rising. I will take up my pencil, which I have forsaken in my great discouragement, and I will go on with my drawing. From that moment, he writes, everything has seemed transformed for me, and now he had to learn his skill. He made the decision to draw, but had no formal training at all, and he had to decide now what and where would he do that. And where he went would be back home to his parents. But he is no longer arriving as Vincent, the minister's son. He has left all that behind. He has left the institutional religion, the doctrines behind. He is even no longer quoting biblical phrases and scripture passages in his letters to Theo. He has internalized it all, and he has come up with his own new creed in this place of darkness in the Borinage. And his new creed was to love many things. Nature, art, literature. Everything that he did, he would pour his love, his passion into it, and that would lead to God, he says, loving many things. So henceforth, he would follow his own path, and he goes back to his parents, welcomed there with sort of trepidation by his Calvinist pastor, father, and mother. But they see he's doing something, and what he is doing is going into the rural landscape again, communicating with the laborers of the earth, like the realist artists that he admired. He wanted to paint those that society really had forgotten. The lowly, the humble, the nameless. I feel great sympathy for them, he writes. I should be very happy if someday I could draw them, so that those unknown or little-known types would be brought before the eyes of the people. He wanted to uphold the dignity of the laborer, of the farmers, of the people working the soil. So here he is, Vincent in his beginnings as an artist. He's 27 years old. He has 10 more years ahead of him as an artist. So art and religion have become fused. He's going to add dignity to man, to humankind. He's going to touch some people with his art. And he has a personal cause, and that is what is starting to shift in the whole art world. Artists are going to be also influenced by Vincent to paint out of a personal cause, out of a personal desire to communicate. Vincent clashes with his parents because of his views, because of his idea that also the novels, the modern novels of Dickens and Eliot and Zola, tell the stories of the Bible in modern words. You find stories of love and redemption and salvation in the modern novels of his time. His father could not accept that. Vincent leaves, and he goes to Den Haag, where he sets himself up in a studio, paid for by Theo. And at heart, he's still a missionary, because his studio becomes a refuge. It is a place where people can come who are hungry and cold. He seeks his models. He only has very little money amongst the soup kitchens, amongst the shelters for the poor. And they flock to him, and he spends time with him, communicates with them as he draws them. And he feels too that as a realist artist, as an artist of his present time, the modern art has to represent the ordinary things of life, especially the poor and the forgotten. Ordinary moments have to be uplifted. So in these several drawings you see his lottery, sort of based on an artist he admired who was also painting the homeless. These are realist artists that have touched him deeply. On the left, on the bottom, is a frontispiece of Charles Dickens's book, Hard Times. You can see the image of a man, oh, thank you, sitting there, which he then copies in a way because he feels it is an expressive image. It's an expressive of devotion, of sorrow. He wants his art to speak. So he uses the models he has to tell a story. His images always really have a narrative content. In his desire to minister, he goes so far that he brings one of the poor people that is modeling for him, a prostitute called Seen, into his studio to stay, with the eventual hope to marry her, to save her. He still has that desire to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to love your neighbor as yourself. All those feelings of charity and compassion are part of his nature. He also has seen images by other artists of his time, relatives, and he emulates that. He wants to show, again, the common people at work. And Seen becomes his main model for that. And in Seen, he also has a model with whom he comes to the point where he makes almost an abstraction of her, something that no longer is her, but a universal symbol of sorrow. He sees in her sorrow, he sees in her her suffering, and what he wants to express in his work eventually is those feelings, so that it will elicit those same feelings in us, or the same understanding, the same feelings that we can share with one another. He also sees these kinds of things metaphorically in trees and in nature. He says one must draw a pollard willow as if they were living beings. Now, I tried to put the same sentiment into the landscape as I put into the figure sorrow. The convulsive, passionate clinging to the earth, and yet being half torn up by the storm. That's life, isn't it? I wanted to express something of the struggle for life in that pale, slender woman's figure, as well as in the black, gnarled, knotty trees. So, to render reality, which is at the same time symbolic, is to render what he sees. He sees in the ordinary the symbolic. And he also says that reality that he is drawing, that he's looking at, must involve the artist completely, and it must be deeply felt, until the thing that you want to express has shaped itself in your mind. Until, he writes, I feel I know a subject. I don't think I should be able to paint sorrow if I didn't feel it myself. So he's sharing Scene's predicaments, he's sharing her suffering, carrying her burden, and at the same time, his own emotions can be now expressed because he has mastered the skills of drawing. He can put that expression and that sentiment into the lines that he's drawing. And this is truly what he felt a modern picture was. It was a truth. It was something that was universal. And all of that universal truth will come into the 20th century too, where artists are seeking to express that. Vincent did not succeed. In a sense, another failure. He was not able to save Scene from her life. He left her sorrowfully and went to a very remote region in Holland, again another time, like in the Borinage, like in the mining village, a time of loneliness, of separation, of isolation, where in a sense he really grappled with the ultimate step of giving up all his personal desires of ever having a family, of ever living a life of a father and mother and children, to just devote it to his art. So in this place of Drenthe, where he discovered other artists had been before him, he made the total transformation to becoming the artist. And Vincent's art from now on will become the example of a truly personal art, because now he is really going to live his art. He is no longer going to put energy into saving people physically. He wants to save and comfort and console people through his art from now on. So he's giving up his personal desires. After Drenthe, he returns home to finish his Dutch learning, his Dutch period. He was back with his parents, living deep once again in the rural countryside, painting the peasants, gaining more ability to express their work, not as romanticized as Millet on your right, but really the peasants, the way he sees them, covered in dust and in soil, and as being one of them. One must paint the peasants as being one of them, as feeling and thinking as they do. And he wanted to paint the modern painting of honesty and truth of the rural life. And that led him to the major Dutch painting of the potato eaters. These are portraits he painted based on other artists that, again, he never left other artists out of his learning and of his painting. Frans Hals painted the facial features, the way the people were, with loose brushstrokes, unfinished almost, leaving you to see, your eyes to see the whole picture. And here is his culmination in Holland of the potato eaters. Almost a religious painting. It was an ugly painting, he even called it himself. It was coarse, it was authentic, it was honest, it was modern. good art did not have to be beautiful. And now I'm leaving the Dutch dark paintings behind because Vincent, with the accomplishment of this piece of work, is ready to embark onto the art scene of Paris, which at that time was the center of the art world, where things were really beginning to happen more and more, where artists were rebelling strongly against the French Academy, where they were shifting away from the rules and regulations. And he arrived in Paris, lived with Theo for 2 years. These are the 2 years where we don't have letters because they lived together. Vincent, on the bottom, is a self-portrait on the bottom left. He painted himself as a dapper Parisian artist, ready to conquer the art world, based on a book he read by Guy de Maupassant of Bellamy, the character who was dapper and was able to move into society, and he hoped he would gain some footing there. And there are other artist portraits of Vincent. These are the only portraits we have of him, no photographs, so we know how he looked like. And he lived in Paris and found amongst the Impressionist artists wonderful teachers who sprang color on him. I mean, his palette changed dramatically when he was in Paris. And you have Monet, and we all know these Impressionist artists. They speak to us through their colors, through their ephemeral quality, through the everyday, ordinary scenes that they painted. These artists had left their studios behind, and like the Japanese artists whose artworks had flooded the art market, they painted la joie de vivre, the joy of living. They painted the landscapes, the parks. They painted ordinary things, ballet lessons. They painted with a different composition. No longer was it the orderly, ruled, symmetrical, balanced painting. It was lines that went off the page, half sections of people who were somewhere else beyond the frame. So the art world exploded for Vincent, and he learned, and he experimented. And he found another artist, and that's the one I almost forgot to put into this lecture. There was another artist, and we don't hear much about him. His name was Monticelli. He was forgotten at the time Vincent was there. There was not much to be seen. He had lived in Paris 30 years before Vincent came. But Vincent found a painting of his. It was textured. If you look at the top painting, you almost would think it is a Vincent Van Gogh, with the brush strokes, with a light reflecting off the textured paint. This was Monticelli. And when Monticelli was asked, why do you paint in that way? Because this was now many years ago, more, in the 50s, 1850s. Monticelli said, I paint this way to be understood 30 years from now. And 30 years later, really to the year, Vincent stood in front of his painting. And Vincent gravitated to this artist, to the impasto thick paint, to the colors that were strong, much stronger than the Impressionists. And he said at some point, once he started to paint more with color, I sometimes think I'm really continuing this man, Monticelli. So I have to put him in there because he is a great influence. But these are some of Vincent's paintings during the time in Paris. You see his colors are changing. They are brighter. Light is shining upon them. He's experimenting. He's beginning to understand, and that's where Vincent is going to grab us more and more. He's going to understand the power color has. Monticelli was an artist who showed the intensity of colors. Monticelli also, like Vincent, was very moved by Delacroix, and you'll see a picture by him in a minute, who also felt that colors were not just to be used to describe something. They were to be used suggestively, expressively. You could change the color of an object if you wanted that object to make a bigger impact on you. So color was going to be part of Vincent's vocabulary. But Vincent, after 2 years in Paris, almost couldn't take that intensity anymore of the arguments between artists, the different art directions and theories, and all that was starting to overwhelm him. What he yearned for was to go back to a place where he was surrounded by nature. He had learned everything he needed to learn. He had taken into him all that was happening in the past and what he experienced in Paris. But he took with him, when he left Paris, mostly the intensive color schemes from Delacroix, the textured painting by Monticelli, and that passion for painting what he saw with the luminous colors. He also had befriended the new generation of artists. The art is changing generation to generation, even faster than that. There is a new avant-garde group called Symbolists, and he befriends Émile Bernard, and Gauguin, who was already part of the Impressionists, but also moving further into the expressive power of color as a language, not just as a light, ephemeral reflection on objects. And Vincent is taking with him the art and philosophy of the Japanese artists, of Zen, of looking at things for a long time, of meditating on things, of becoming what you paint, which is what the Japanese Zen artists would do. So below I put an image of Vincent's shoes, which a lot of people know. It is a wonderful image of intense colors, not at all an impressionist painting. It also is a symbolical painting. What do shoes mean to us? Well-worn shoes, mudded shoes, just flung on the ground. What images, what concepts is he trying to express with this? And then, of course, we see Vincent no longer the dapper artist, but he's wearing the laborer's smock. He is the artist worker, the artiste ouvrier. He wants to go back to be amongst the laborers of the soil, back to nature. But on his right arm, you see, he's bringing the palette of colors that he discovered in Paris with him. So now we are in the south of France, where he left to go to find Monticelli, who had originally been from Marseille. He established himself in this wonderful yellow house. Look at the intensity of colors. Yellow became his favorite color, and we'll see that a lot in the suns he painted. And he also hoped to create in this place an artist colony, like the Japanese artists he imagined to be, working together, supporting each other. And for the arrival of the only artist who would join him, Gauguin, he painted these incredible sunflowers, which we are all familiar with. In Arles, he stayed 444 days and made 200 paintings. And he was not at all drawn by the beautiful Roman ruins of Arles and the beautiful medieval cottages. He was back in nature again. Feeling after the Paris his vitality increase. And he's not so much trying to emulate the Impressionists as he's trying to paint the luminous quality of a tree, the interior, the essence. It is looking at things for a long time that ripens and gives you a deeper understanding. And he felt it was a painter's duty to do that. He was duty-bound since childhood. These are his wheat trees, wheat fields, always, always wheat. Again, stemming from his childhood, from that image of wheat, the wheat field had much more symbolism than just being a stalk of wheat. It symbolized humanity. It symbolized the cycle of life. It symbolized birth, sowing, seeds, and harvest. And you'll see the harvester sometimes inside of his wheat field as part of the fabric of life. And this one we all know. It's his sower. Millet, the sower he started to practice early on in his beginnings, resurfaces again in this image. And this is an amazing parable in paint, I call it, because it is a paradox of comfort and grief, of joy and sadness, of sun shining upon the new life that is being sown into the soil, as well as on the ripe wheat that is going to be harvested and will die. So there is a whole cycle of life involved in here, and we're invited to be part of that cycle with that path that goes right through into the center of the painting. This is another painting that I wanted to show you. It is a painting that he and Gauguin, or a view he and Gauguin painted together. Vincent saw it as an ode to joy, an ode to labor, an ode to the fecundity of the earth and the harvest of grapes. It's a red harvest. whereas Gauguin saw it as human misery and toil. So the two clashed in their understanding of what was supposed to be part of their expressive quality. I have to move. I'm talking too much about these things. There's so much more still to show you. But Vincent, due to the tensions with Gauguin, who was there only for 3 months, that unsettled him. The tensions with Gauguin unsettled him, and in this time here, he experiences the first of his many seizures. From now on, he will be suffering physically. And the seizure resulted in the severing of his ear. And he was put into this hospital where he painted now more for his own recovery. You can see the photograph on the bottom. He painted what he saw, but expressed it in his own way. And he painted the inside of the ward. And then he painted an image that shows his philosophy of life, that yes, there are difficulties. And he's painting this to convince himself too. There are difficulties in life. You see the gnarled tree trunks obscuring your vision. But if you look beyond those difficulties, there is joy, there is life, there is hope. And he's painting this partly to show us, his viewers, but also partly to convince himself that there is sorrow, but there's also joy in everything we do. Arles, he could not go back to anymore into his yellow house. It was boarded up. The people of Arles were afraid of him. With his seizures, with his eccentricities, he had to leave Arles, and he found a place not too far away in an asylum, a former monastery that took in people with mental disabilities. And here he has the gnarled tree trunks, in a way, the bars on his windows, through which he had to look beyond. And he did. The obstacles did not prevent him from seeing beyond, again, the wheat fields, beyond the window of his asylum. In all the cycles of the whole season. He was there for a whole year. He paints now in such a way that everything seems to be woven together. The sun is part of the landscape. The landscape is part of the sun. The reaper is part of the wheat. Nothing is separated. Everything is connected. It is a huge statement about creation, about the comfort that you can find, and that is there for us all to see. The sun became for him an emblem of the divine. He painted the inner gardens of the asylum, a place of rest, a close-up of ivy and trunks that was supposed to comfort the people there, but he was also hoping to comfort those who would look at the painting that he created. He was amongst the flowers, the irises of the hospital. Some of his best paintings come out of this time in the asylum. He's on the ground, he's immersed in nature, he's coming face to face. Like the Japanese said, you paint the iris only if you become the iris. And that's what he did. And again, the Japanese was always there as an influence on him. When he was well enough, he could go out into the countryside, and in the olive trees, he saw the struggle and the suffering that he felt too. So he identified with nature. And he was able to express that and make it intelligible for all of us. We might not see it the way he did, but through painting it, maybe we can sense some of that passion and some of that identity with nature and what the metaphors are teaching us. After a year in Siamese in the asylum, Vincent's seizures never stopped. He was urged by Theo, who was still in Paris, to come closer to Paris so they could see each other once more. And he comes kind of close circle. You see in the bottom left-hand corner the thatched hut of the time in Holland, the dark earthiness of the hut, and the ones that he painted in Auvers, where he is for the last 70 days of his life, have a dance-like quality, a quality of exuberance despite his suffering, because he's using line and color to express what he feels and what he sees. Dr. Gachet's Doctor, every picture is narrative. I've told you that before. He always puts narrations in his into his pictures. He has 2 books there, books that he loved, that this doctor also loved. They had a common bond. And he's holding a sprig of foxglove, indicating that he is a medical doctor, because foxglove is what you derive digitalis from. This, on the right-hand side, is one of the last paintings that Vincent worked on, because in Auvers he discovers the same artist that was in Drenthe at the time that he was there. And he's painting as if life depends on it. He's painting the wheat fields, the harvest. Auvers is surrounded by wheat fields. And I was there several years ago at the same time, August, as this painting that Vincent did of the wheat sheaves was done. And it's amazing to me that he could look at a section of the wheat field and paint it. Paint it because for him wheat was more than just wheat. It gave him solace, it gave him comfort, and this is one of the quotes I often look at because I find it quite remarkable. If you think that every grain of wheat contains the germination force that is love in us, what a powerful place a wheat field really is. Wheatfield with Crows was not his last painting, but it definitely is a painting that ties him back to that image from his childhood of a funeral procession through the wheat field. There are paths going through it. It is a powerful painting, and whatever it really means, we don't know. But it has passion in it. It has maybe some doom in it. It has a real heaviness to it. Or it has, who knows, some hope in it with the yellow wheat. But it is surrounded by this wheat field that Vincent lies buried. He was wounded one day, 70 days after he came to Auvers, by a gunshot. He died 2 days later in his brother's arms. Theo came to be with him. And because it was deemed a suicide, which it isn't, he was not allowed to be buried inside the town, but was brought to a cemetery right outside Auvers. But it is surrounded by the wheat field that he so loved. Vincent's art doesn't die with him, and that is the wonderful thing that the sower also symbolizes. There is an eternal quality to these paintings, the eternal quality to the parable of the sower that always sows new seeds, new life. And now I'm going to go as fast as I can, because what I wanted to show you is Vincent's work foremost, and then show you how some of the artists were influenced by his work, looking for similarities of expression. Cézanne was also an artist who broke away from the Impressionists and looked for the geometric underlying truth inside of nature. Vincent did that too. The horizon line is gone. It's all almost about a pattern of nature, of colors. Vincent influenced Picasso too, because Vincent's portraits here as a Zen Buddhist monk was not so much about the likeness, but about character, about the person inside, and that's what Picasso is trying to create here too. Other artists who created portraits, not so much about the person, but about the mood, about the character of a person. I'm moving into the isms, the many different art forms of the 20th century, Fauvism, symbolism, expressionism, and I'm showing you Vincent's work on the top, and you can see some of the similarities, some of the decorative qualities of La Berceuse, the cradle rocker, and of the places he painted. Not so much about the place, but more about the atmosphere, how he felt the places to be. Two paintings on the left by Vincent that symbolized his struggle. It was taken from nature, a ravine and a quarry within which there are people struggling. That's the way he felt when he was inside of his seizures, trying to make it out of the hole, through the ravine. This type of expressive quality of art is something that Kokoschka took into his work. You will see lots of art in the early part of the 20th century that is expressing feelings and emotions and passions. Here you have Vincent's tree on the bottom. The 20th century artists moved towards abstraction more, away from the real objects to paint more what the object made them feel. What was the simplest way you could express a tree? And that's what Mondrian did. It was a minimalist approach to art, abstractions. Vincent's iris, a close-up of nature, It's about the irisness of the flower, not about the iris itself as much. And Georgia O'Keeffe brought that even further, even closer, looking into the eye of a flower. Vincent's paintings almost are precursors of what was called in the mid-50s, 20th century, the 1950s, action painting, where painters immerse themselves into their work. And I'm thinking of Jackson Pollock, which you'll see in a minute. You wouldn't associate Vincent with Jackson, but he painted just a flower field of dandelions. He painted just grass. His sketches are, when you really look at them close up, just lines and swirls. His shorthand, he called it. And Jackson Pollock artwork almost has that quality because Jackson too was inside his painting, was part of the painting. His whole body was involved in the painting. Vincent's body was involved in his painting. This is an artist where it's quite obvious that Vincent had an impact on him. I don't have to say much. You see the top is Vincent, the bottom is Hockney, David Hockney. Wheatfield again. Another one that took Vincent's image of the artist and transferred it into his own work. And then we come, as we move into the 20th century, into pure abstraction. And Vincent was a precursor for that too. If you look at his below sketch, it's hard to even tell what it is. It is a sketch of mountains where the lines are pure energy, where the lines talk, where the lines become more music than visual art. And Kandinsky was an artist who looked at painting and wanted to separate it from what we thought painting was, but to give us the experience as if we're listening to music. You let the lines and the colors let you take you somewhere. Experience it without having to be attached to something tangible. So Vincent's drawing on top of roots is almost that already. Almost not recognizable, but it's the gnarled lines and the colors and all that he's trying to show us. This kind of art demands a response from us, but it's not a rational response. Oftentimes we have to just let it sink in and see where it takes us. Vincent always believed, and I have that quote at the beginning too, that the future artist will use the color as the main expressive power. The German writer Goethe said that color is the language of our soul, that our soul subconsciously responds to color. Vincent was doing that already with his art, with his color. The Wheatfield and the Reaper, as you see, is almost pure color, not much detail there. And the portrait of a farmer farming in the hot midday sun was not so much about the farmer, but about the heat and the intensity of light that he was working under. And you have now artists of the mid-20th century who are becoming what we call color field painters. They don't rely on anything tangible anymore, but color speaks. So this is the end of my presentation. There is an art of the future, Vincent wrote. I feel it so strongly, and the artist of the future will be a colorist, recognizing that color is very much a part of the art language. That's the end. 8 o'clock.
We have time for questions, and there are 2 microphones. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get you a mic.
Oh, there's one. I'm sorry I went so fast. There's so much.
I'm curious to know what occupation Theo had that he was able to support his brother throughout his life.
That's a very good question. That's again one of those major details I left out. Theo was also put into the art dealership apprentice that Vincent was supposed to do. Theo stuck with it because not only was he supporting Vincent, he also supported his parents. I don't know how he lived, but most of his money went to his family members, and definitely to Vincent. Yes.
Theo only lived like a year or two after Van Gogh, and of course the obvious heartbreak, but I was wondering if you know any of the details of...
Yes, Theo was very ill himself. He actually only lived 6 months after Vincent died, of a broken heart, but also of other ailments he had. He was newly married, had a child, and but actually went insane. He had he really was in very, very bad shape. And so I think with the death of Vincent, that sense of having to support his brother had given him the energy to keep going. Theo's wife, Johanna, she has a major responsibility of bringing us the artwork, because all the art that Vincent was painting throughout these years was stored in Theo's and his wife's apartment in Paris. And his wife's brother said, get rid of the junk, because she was going to move back to Holland. Not only did she not get rid of it, she ended up exhibiting it maybe 10 years after Vincent died, and it was already, had made an impact, but she also discovered those 652 letters that Vincent had written. She did not have Theo's letters because Vincent did not keep them, but she translated those letters. The first volumes of Vincent's letters are translated by Theo's wife, and she once said that through the letters that Vincent wrote, she discovered her husband, Theo. So she was with Theo and Vincent both as she was translating the letters. But yes, he died very soon after. Okay.
You said that Vincent did not kill himself.
Right.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, there are now books written about that too. There's some very good books that have done extensive research. I always had a sense he didn't, because I read his letters, and there are no indication of him wanting to kill himself. He, in his last letter, is asking for more paint. Theo sent him paint from Paris. He also wrote about this last painting and what he still wanted to do with that painting. He also had a sense of, even though he suffered, a sense of faith. He had a belief in high. He felt there was another side to life, but he was not about to end his life. And now, in the recent research, it has come out that he did not, anyway, own a gun. He crawled back to the auberge, the inn in Auvers, without his paint supplies, with which he had left in the morning. Nothing was ever found. No gun, no paint supplies, nothing at all. But what we do know, and some authors have gone on that track, was that there was a band of teenage boys that taunted him. Wealthy kids from Paris that came into Auvers for their summer vacation. And one of them did have a very faulty pistol. And they would shoot on birds and squirrels, but they also frightened Vincent a lot, taunted him. And the theory is that they may have taunted him and he may have accidentally gotten shot. He was shot in the abdomen. And, but the thing is, he never said anything about that. He protected those boys. And the boys went on and lived a normal life. He and Theo spoke with each other for the last 2 days. Nothing was recorded. So he was deemed to be a suicide, which in a way the town also protected the boys by making it look like a suicide. So the theory is that he did not kill himself.
But Theo thought he did.
Theo probably knew what happened. Maybe the two talked, but Theo was told, don't tell anyone. Nothing ever came out from Vincent. It just came out with the research that people did in this century. Yeah.
There was a musician who must have been much taken by Van Gogh, and when I heard his music, I was drawn into it as well. Starry, Starry Night.
Oh yes, yes, that's a beautiful song.
Yeah. Very meaningful.
Very meaningful, and sung and played by somebody who you feel really understood Vincent also. You're right. Yes, it's a lovely song.
Thank you again. About a few months ago, I don't know if it was the New York Review of Books or London, Julian Barnes, the author, did a beautiful essay. But what he talked about, I want to throw at you, is that what, even past Picasso, very few artists have so much, I won't say baggage or mythology, that he talked about what it's like today, 2015, 2016, to experience Van Gogh fresh without whether it's the Kirk Douglas mythology or he took his life as love is often due.
Psychological
The
stuff,
Don
all
McLean
the
song.
psychological.
We have so much baggage with him.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it struck me, it was a few months ago, right? The Clark,
Yeah.
and then they had the Van Gogh. And I felt it was right after the article was out. I was struck. I want to ask you is what do you do to experience Van Gogh afresh? Because I think it is a challenge. And-
Yes, that's a good question. I did read many books, and you're right. There is so much written, about his illness, about his psychological, about his parentage, about being born a year after his first brother was still born on the same day, all these things. Well, what gives you the fresh look on Vincent is reading his letters, what I feel. And by loving art and understanding art a little bit through my own vocation, but the letters reveal this man. He didn't leave a thought unwritten. Because if you look at his volumes of letters, there are sometimes 30 pages. And he would write one day, and then he wrote the next day or 2 days later. In between, he painted. And then he read all these books. He read over 480 books, classics books, contemporary books. So the letters, I think, and there are some very good books with letters, excerpted letters. You don't want to necessarily read all 800, he wrote to other people too. But some of the books have taken letters and are really are able to give a good view of Vincent that way. That's such a good question, though, yeah.
I don't know if I'm correct or not, but Theo's little boy, was he named Vincent?
Vincent Wilhelm, just like Vincent was, yes.
And what became of him? Did he go into the art field as well?
Well, he was, of course, the son of Theo's wife and grew up in a house in Holland with all his uncle's paintings around him. Because she, of course, cataloged them. She had exhibitions. She loaned them. She sold them. So he grew up with that. And he is the founder of the Vincent Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. So he's very instrumental of bringing a lot of that work, not all of it, because lots of the work was sold. But if you do go to Amsterdam and you see the Vincent van Gogh Museum, that is probably the only place where you can see the chronology of the artwork hung in the dark images of Holland and his progression and his view of the poor and uplifting them through his work all the way to the sun-drenched fields of the south. So he was a doctor, Vincent Wilhelm. He was an engineer, but he was very instrumental in supporting and continuing his uncle's life work. Yes. Yeah.
Two questions. First, the Clark exhibit had, at the beginning of the exhibit, showed that he had some paintings or drawings that were influenced by lithographs, and it said that he had worked with a lithograph at some point in time.
Yes.
I just want to ask that. And also, did he ever have, you talked about influences, but did he ever have any formal training on how to paint?
Good two questions. First of all, the lithographs. He was very interested in lithography. And as a matter of fact, the image Sorrow, he made a lithograph of that. He made lithographs of some other work. But he didn't have the money, that was one thing, to really go into that. But what his desire was to make lithographs, was to spread his work to as many people as he could, especially to those who couldn't afford to buy artwork. And which I find such a wonderful thought is how many people have Vincent van Gogh calendars, Vincent van Gogh cards. His art has been spread. But that was his desire with the lithography to do that. And what was the other question again?
Formal painting instruction. Did he ever have a teacher?
Oh, yeah, right. No, he didn't have a formal art training, although when he was in high school, there was an artist, a teacher there who felt that art was important. But that was it, that was high school. After that, he didn't have any art training. He tried a little bit in a studio in Paris. He tried a little bit of art making in a studio in Antwerp. But he was his own man. He couldn't, after drawing people from nature, he was put in a studio where he had to draw plaster casts. And he created the plaster cards as real people rather than a plaster cast. And his professors were exasperated with him because he didn't do it the way they wanted him to do it. And he even flung a plaster cast out the window because he said, that's not life. And so he had little bits, but he already was ahead of his game. He worked and worked and worked. I mean, he made thousands of sketches all the time. So to answer that question, no, not really any formal art training. Yeah.
Well, one more question?
Could you name a particular editor of the letters that fix upon his spiritual letters with the paintings? Trying to, I don't want to read all 800 letters that you mentioned.
Yes.
But I would like to read, say, a good selection of them. And do you have a particular editor?
Well, the Van Gogh Museum has published a book, but it's thick, with an excerpt of his letters. I have just written a book, so now I'm self-promoting myself, which there are quotes from his letters in it, but it speaks about his spirituality, his spiritual vision.
What is the title of that book?
Yes, I have it right here. There is an order form somewhere around here, over there in the back. So it's a little booklet that just came out in November. But there are other authors, and actually, I list some of them in the back that focus on his vision, his prophetic vision, really, and on his spiritual nature. There are books of excerpts of his letters, but they don't necessarily focus on his spirituality. But the Van Gogh, if you go online and the Van Gogh Museum, they will advertise their book of selected letters. Instead of 6 volumes, you'll have 1.
Where is the Van Gogh Museum?
In Amsterdam, in Holland. Yeah. But you can get them here too. There are some good excerpts of his letters available. Yes.
Okay, Carol, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful presentation.